really. And I thought, every once in a while, someone comes into your life and encourages you to see things in a new light, to be better, to live and teach with purpose, while finding the magic in things. Michael is that person. Although Michael was, technically HR at NIA, it was very apparent and immediate that I felt he was so much more than that. He brings a real special quality that I think every school or team of people, really, for that matter, can really benefit from. He's got a unique way of seeing things that I find others don't see. And he brings that to the surface, to be praised, to be appreciated, or to be critiqued at times, in a drive that I see him have to help others become better. Michael has a wide and in-depth understanding of psychology, spirituality, human potential, education, and people, really, which has been a huge asset to NIA over the years, which I've personally and professionally really benefited from. We connected early on during my time at NIA and immediately, found things in common. I've been super lucky to have worked with him and really grateful to call him a friend. And so I hope you guys enjoy what he has to share with us tonight. And thank you, Michael, for sharing with us.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I'll just remind everyone, if you've got a paper and pencil in front of you, colored pencil crayons if you have as well, but get something to have in front of you. Pen is, paper is fine. Pencil. Participative. How dare anyone do early childhood education without something participative with everybody? Okay, I'll tune you into what that participative is then. Tonight, you get to create a found poem. And I know before you freak out that might be something you're not used to, and what's a poem, and I'm not a poet, I'll return you to your basic human nature, which is to put things together and put them sometimes together in strange ways, strange shapes, strange forms. And so a found poem is, as you're listening tonight, to myself, moi, to listening to what's on the slide presentation that I give, listening to what other people might say in tonight, that you are a listener of a special nature. You're a listener of a communal experience. And so you can jot down terms, ideas, things you hear. Could be an image you want to draw, something that connects you. So all of those become part of you building a resonant connection to everything that's going on. So it's not just sitting back listening to a lecture. So you can do that as you go, as I'm speaking, as things happen, as you see the slides, or you can wait till the end and even do it then. But there will be a little bit of time at the end for people to share their creations on this found poem. And again, we're not looking for poets per se. We're looking for a poetic participative inquiry. Well, welcome tonight. This has been for me a long circle around of 4 years, which is hard to believe that I joined an organization that's called a Daycare in this world, but it's an educational center. And that was my interest because I am an educator by profession. But I also entered, as you'll see in the PowerPoint presentation, I entered on many different levels, not just as an educator. And I will bring that forward. I think without further ado, I'm going to just go to the screen share and begin the presentation. And I'm going to also invite you and those who are courageous and brave and extraordinary to come in at times and just pop in and ask me a question and interrupt the presentation. Are you kidding me? Just try and sit in front of 3, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds and see that they will always interrupt, and in a good way most of the time. So let me do the screen share and I'll begin. Desktop. Not quite what I was expecting. I was expecting to go right to the desktop. What am I doing wrong, Barbara? Yes, here she comes, my digital guide. I thought it would have gone to my desktop directly.
It's not on your desktop.
It's on my desktop, but this isn't going to it, see?
Go to documents.
Ah,
No.
that is weird, isn't it?
Where is it? Is it open on your desktop?
No, I mean, it's in the
Open it. Open it.
sub. It's in the sub.
Open it. Open it.
It's right here.
Open it.
Share.
Close it out. Close it out.
It's going to here.
Close it out. Close out the share. Try again.
I'm not sure if people see that.
No, they don't.
No.
If you upload the file, will Barbara be able to pull it over to her computer and open it up for you?
Yeah, why don't you email it to me?
Well, I won't email. It's too big.
It's weird. Did
You'd
you
have to
test
put it on
earlier?
a stick here, Barbara, if you want to put it on a memory stick. Anyway, all of you can just be working on your found poem while you're hearing all this. Be interesting what you'll pick up.
Did you test it?
So it's there.
Give me your flash drive.
Actually, it's on this one. Called NIA, the PowerPoint presentation of some kind. Anyway, let's carry on. Barbara's going to see if she can bring that up. Because what I want to start with is 3 different aspects to this presentation. So first will be some of my philosophical orientation. Who am I? Where am I coming from? Why would I want to talk about childhood and mental health tonight, which is sort of the focus. But obviously it's through the lens and the eyes of my journey as a person moving into Nanaimo in 2020 and all of a sudden discovering that, there's a daycare down the street. And that got me going on to what could I do there? I was ready to be a volunteer. I was ready to do anything just to connect with the community. So that will be the first part, is philosophical. Then there'll be the story of my connecting with NIA as an artist in residence. So I am an artist and have been all my life. And that's a really important part of shaping me and how I think about and come to the world, the lenses that I carry. And those are lenses not just of my eyes, but of all my sensory system. So when Nick said that sometimes Michael sees things that other people don't see, I think it's because I've been really highly, quote, trained and have trained myself to be an observer of things that are on the edge. So that's one of the themes for tonight. And then the last part of the presentation is going to be my journey with this organization as an HR person, human resources, which eventually I was hired to be a participant and operate that program. Oh, great. We got the PowerPoint up. Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, you can just put that on the full show of the program, that PowerPoint, Barbara, so we get full screen. But that's good. Yeah. So the last part will be the HR part of me. And I do have to say, as I start the presentation, note, all views expressed by Dr. Fisher are his own and do not represent that of Nanaimo Innovation Academy or its board of directors. Let's see how this is going to advance now.
You're gonna have to ask me to.
Oh, just advance it, Barbara. Yeah, just with the use the arrows, okay? Because sometimes I don't want to go full, so just use the arrows if you can advance. Thank you. Okay, what does it look like for me being at NIA? What's going on? Yes, the crazy teacher. here's when I was in artist residency at the beginning. And this is what I'll call the little boy theme, because as I said, this presentation is a lot about me as well. It is a personal journey as well as kind of an anthropological and educator's journey through an organization and connecting with families, children, the community that this daycare exists within in the city of Nanaimo. And the little boy here is not the little boy that you see as in a man's body, but there's a little boy inside that man. And when I worked with the children, I often found that they mirrored something back to me about my little inner boy. And so I was to be working at NIA in this way, I was constant as an artist, allowing them to constantly remind me of my child, my artist, my child. And then of course I was doing activities with them. And in this particular case, if you look at the slide, the young boy has got a feather in his hand that I gave him, and I was asking them questions on a questionnaire, a very simple questionnaire on different types of drawings, and we'll get to that. Next slide, Barbara. Just arrows. Use the arrow, Barbara. Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. So let me dedicate this to my mom, because when you walk into a daycare, one of the things you're aware of is everyone is motherers. That was the word I termed as an artist. I'm moving into a motherers colony. And I had different terms for trying to understand what it was that I was walking into. I've never been in daycare before. This is the very first time. I remember taking my own two daughters to a daycare, I think 1 or 2 days, and that was the last time I ever wanted to take my children into a daycare. So I'm very aware of the kind and the quality of daycare that is important. And as you'll see, NIA is quite a special place. My mom was definitely a war bride, a new immigrant to Canada, and that deeply influenced me. This is me at 10 years old. And one of the rare pictures that I think we both were just really happy. It was a tough life for her and for me in many ways, even though I had a pretty good childhood. Next. And this is the last art installation I did in the residency, and I'm just showing it overlapping because it actually turned out to be The Mother is Present, the sign I made, and we'll come back to why the stones. Next slide. So I'm approaching coming into this organization, yes, as an artist, but I also am very well trained as an animal behaviorist, and I have some anthropological background. And I ask questions. I like asking big why questions. So these are all in the background of my being an artist, being an HR person, right? So this is the underbelly of who I am. And so as the observer, I ask the big questions. What are humans doing and why? Why are we the only species that spoils its own nest? And that comes back to my first career, which is actually an environmental biologist. So I'm really concerned. So yeah, thanks. Next arrow, Barbara, and the next arrow, point advance. So you just leave it there. What kind of artist am I? People think, well, artists are people who, decorate things. They may come in and work with children in schools and in daycares and do an activity, right? And get everybody involved and put colored fish up all on the fence or something like that. There's so many artists that do those kinds of projects, and they're fine for what they are. It's just not the kind of art that I do. It's not the kind of questions that I ask, and it's not the kind of inquiry I'm interested in. So I really am also asking myself, what kind of human am I? I guarantee you when I go to Quest, sorry, not Quest, that was where I used to work. When I go to NIA, I actually ask this question of myself in a very subconscious way, is what kind of artist am I and what kind of human am I? When I show up on that property and I'm in front of whoever I am with, I actually ask those questions in a very subtle way all the time. Next. Okay, so what's my educational philosophy? It's a 4D educational philosophy, and I'll just not going to define 4D, but it's obviously another dimension than what we ordinarily see as three-dimensional reality. And that will hopefully seep through in some of the imagery, some of the discussion, some of what I talk about tonight. I'm a holistic centered educator, and that means I'm not just a human centered educator. I'm not just an adult centered, and I'm not just child centered. Those are all useful and I integrate those, but I actually am a global centric cosmocentric, and creation-centered person and educator. So my philosophy works on creation-centered. So why these two images? Let's just leave it there for a moment. The one on the right is an image that I brought into, and this will tell you a little bit about one of the places I worked at was Quest Ranch. And this was in Alberta back in the 80s. And I was brought in to be an art teacher for the young boys. It was a treatment program for behavioral disabled, so-called boys and their families. And that was a pull-out program 24/7 for a year long, and 13 to 18-year-old boys. And we had 7 or 8 of them, and we had about 20 staff. And I was brought in to teach some art, and all of a sudden, the art I was doing with them, the art they were doing, became a very deep conversation, became therapeutic very quickly. I'd already studied some art therapy at that time. I'd participated in art therapy groups and workshops. So I had a good sense of what art therapy was, but I wasn't a trained art therapist per se. But I used it in my conversations, the ways I communicated. This painting by Bourgeois, I think, on the French, and he really had this beautiful poster I had in my house. And one day, if you can imagine working in a treatment center with 13, 18-year-old boys, most of them pretty rough shape and pretty unsocialized, pretty destructive. It was a war zone. So I went there 2 days a week, and I was the therapeutic director, and I worked directly with the boys and families, and I also did the staff training. So again, I'm like 30, early 30s here doing this kind of work. Really did it because I could do the job. It was not like I had all the training. So in those days in the early 80s, you could get away with that. You actually got hired for a job because you're actually good at it, not because you have certificates. So I was in the middle of that community trying to work with some really dark forces because there was a lot of gang behavior that would get set up in these trailers where the young people were and the staff, and it got pretty scary for everybody, staff and kids at times. And I was very aware of that terror. And one day I just said, I'm going to try something completely different. And this has got to do with how my philosophy works is I brought in this huge poster of this painting and I set it into the kitchen where everybody ate. And that was the place where it got really intense because the boys are all sitting at the tables and the staff's in there trying to, keep them from wrecking things and throwing food or whatever they might be doing, fighting, etc. It wasn't chaos all the time, but it was chaos most of the time. And so at this particular place, I thought, I'm going to bring this in the kitchen, just set it down on the floor so everybody can see it. And it had a glass cover on it. Now you got to remember, why would I do that? Because these kids break things when they're mad. And I brought it and they were working with me. So they knew I was kind of the deer. They called me the Merlin. And because I did things differently, I came at different angles to communicating with what they did. And when I put this painting in, it sat there for 2 months and nobody touched it. The glass never got broken. And this was beautiful, beautiful painting that I felt brought a whole different quality about what the human experience is about. And yes, we can see angels, but I wasn't promoting angels. I wasn't promoting anything other than there are beautiful, incredible things in this earth that are not just normal. They're not just about the destruction, the battles, the power plays that are going on for staff and faculty. And I think it affected definitely the whole organization. I can't prove it, but that's kind of what I do when I walked into NIA as an artist. You can go to the next slide. I just also seeing a painting here that I call a 4-dimensional painting by another artist, Annette Newkirk. Go ahead, Barbara. And this is one of the paintings I did during that NIA residency as well. Yeah, I did this painting. I did several painting of children. And this is, I didn't show them. I just did these on my home. This is what I do at home. I would come home from a day at the daycare. And I was just really influenced by working with children in imagery. So again, you can see there's kind of a 4th dimensional reality in here. Some people might call it a mystical reality or a dimension that's other. This is actually, I think it's called Orca is listening to her. Next slide. I did 2 articles from my research and looking and studying this organization. And again, this is all unofficially. I don't have any kind of university, qualifications to do research, and Keely, the director of NIA, never said do research, but she always asked me, she says, you're probably going to do a PhD on this at some time. And I said, yeah, I could. I collected so much information, but what I did do is definitely tried to honor, as much as I could, the anonymity of people. But what I was studying was, you can see this first article, is something I came up with in the residency as an inquiry called minusio, which really means sort of finding the less that can make more. Everything I was doing as an artist, and then again, working in the organizations for years less, is how do I do the minimum intervention? Again, kind of like bringing that painting in, that poster, and dropping it in the middle of an organization and just letting it do its own work. And somehow, that is a lot what I'm really interested in, is the less amount of intervention, but getting the most out of it. So that's what minusio is, a word I created. And you can see I work with the aesthetic. I also did an article here that was basically a gallery, and I got a really substantial grant to do this research as an artist at NIA. I put out a proposal after I had the idea and sold the idea to Keely and some of the faculty. And she said, go for it. And so I needed funding. I needed to have supplies. I needed to be able to work a 6-month residency. So this is just, again, you can look it up. I actually got an award from this particular university in Arts Integrated Studies for the work I did at NIA. So this is a real kudo to me. It's a real plus, not just about me. This is about NIA and the quality of the organization of what it did and what I was able to do with it. Next slide. A couple big pictures, big context issues for me right now is what's happening in our world and how does that affect children's mental health? What are some of the good changes, the bad changes? How is childhood itself compromised? And childhood is not just about children. Childhood is about the child interacting with multi-level environments and conditions. So I define childhood in a very, very broad way. But there's 2 things that are exciting in Canada right now. I wanted to share these because they are only recent. And that's certainly, Pierre Trudeau's wife has written a book, and that book, Closer Together, is all about mental health. She's a mental health advocate for children and youth and is highly promoted this for many years. And it's a good sign when I see leaders in a country, and the governmental leaders and or their spouses, partners, focusing on mental health. That makes me very pleased. And then Mark Carney, who's just become our Prime Minister here in Canada, he writes a book on a couple of years before he got elected this year, on values, a values-centered leadership. So leadership's very important to me. Obviously, if we're going to change organizations, organizational cultures, and that means then our societal cultures and how those interact, leadership is going to be really important. So I am a leadership consultant as well as an organizational consultant on the side. Next. Well, let's get to a couple books. I'm not going to focus highly on all the details and all the statistics that are showing that our children right now, our youth, are a highly anxious generation. I've talked to many people, both in the research world, but also in just popular world, and certainly some people at NIA, the faculty, etc. And we have been aware. There are at times the faculty has talked about and said, oh, this is a group of COVID kids. And you hear that expression and it kind of shocks you. And you go, yeah, I mean, when you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right, in a particular year, COVID, for example, had a huge impact on those young children's lives foundationally. And I care about that, and we ought to care about it as caregivers, and what are the long-term consequences. So these are just 2 of the books that I have played with, looked at. Some you may be familiar with. One's the American on the left, and then Gabriel Mate, the Canadian Vancouver doctor as well. I put the myth of normal up there because normal is one of the words that really makes me go like that and go crazy. And so I like to share with you that there's a wonderful quote and a wonderful song by Bruce Cockburn, and I can tell I'm a boomer generation. Bruce Cockburn wrote a wonderful folk song, and it's called "The Trouble with Normal Is It Always Gets Worse." Next slide.
Hmm.
And I just asked a few questions again, where I'm just diving in before I, with these sort of bigger contexts. What does a toxic culture mean? And Gabor Mate talks about what happens when we realize it's no measure of health or intelligence to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So you can see these are big philosophical questions that I definitely consider in everything I do. And then I asked the question, what has happened to Western medicine, psychiatry, psychology that has led it to fail keeping up with the distresses, emotional imbalance, anxiety, and disconnectivity that is harming us and making us sick chronically? I'm very concerned about what's happening in psychiatry and psychology as fields, because educators and education as a field really depends and really relies on psychology. Not that that's my favorite. I wish it wasn't that way, but it has been the history of education for a long, long time to almost codependently depend, and not always in a good way, on psychology and psychiatry, etc. And then what happens when today, the last question, Barbara, if you just go back, what happens when today a movement of normal parents are saying, and this is what I've heard in a few different situations, parents are actually now on the internet, for example, saying, we're not doing well, folks. We're not doing. They're advertising this to the society. This is a message. This is like a child asking for attention. This is a parents are asking for attention. And they're saying, we're not doing well. This is too much. You know, in a 21st century world, the world we live post-COVID, post-November 5th, 2024 election in America, whatever it might be, these incredible pressures and changes on adults. So we got to listen to that when they're saying we're not doing well. This is really hard. All right, I'm going to focus on this theme now and walk into how I got started at NIA. Compassion and intelligence is a word I just threw down when I was making this. It's okay, Barbara. You can just leave it. Let's go. Just go ahead. And it's about also making a paradigm shift. So I'm always interested in how to work in an organization, how to work with myself, how to work with faculty, in this case at NIA. And is there a paradigm shift that can happen? Well, I'm not going to go into explaining what a paradigm shift, but it is like shifting your lens, right? It's like something transforms in the lens and the way you start to see things and yourself and reality. And then I'm going to suggest also to look as we go through the slides, and it'll get a little more fun than all this theoretical stuff at the front end here, is I have an upside down philosophy of development. And I'm interested in awareness and adaptability. Next slide. I don't know if you know, but when I taught drawing, this is something that a lot of art teachers know. And it is that when you're teaching drawing, so I was in a grade 5-6 classroom, I was a teacher way back in the 80s. And when you try to get kids to draw a realism or somewhat real, an image, let's just say 8, 9, 10-year-olds, for example, and you try to get them to copy an image as you're exploring that idea of representation, not that it's the only kind of art or drawing, they really have trouble, very deep trouble, most of them, 99%. There's the odd child that is capable. Most of them cannot draw a face when they're trying to copy it very well. What researchers have found is that when you turn the image upside down, the same face that they're struggling to draw, they actually can draw this quite accurately. And it's because the right side of the brain has kicked in. The image has gotten off the left brain, the dominant brain of an organized face, that they sort of recognize everything in the right place. But it's fascinating when everything is now in sort of the wrong place, like it's upside down. They actually, another part of the brain kicks in and they can master a skill really quickly. And that's a metaphor for tonight, the upside down philosophy. Next. There's why do we go upside down when some people do spiritual practices? That's interesting to me. It's another form of upside down therapy, if you will, or regulation. Next slide. Fear and love are two of the things, these deep motivations. These are part of the why do we do what we do? Do we do things because we're afraid, Do we do things because we're coming from a love base or a fear base? And those will flip. Sometimes love is dominating, sometimes fear is dominating. And for some situations, some children, some family systems, some organizational systems, they never get out of the fear-based structure. There's almost like a chronic anxiety, tension, conflict, continually driving the system. Not just moments, they have moments of love, they have moments of care. It's not like they don't, but I look for that. I look for organizations, are they operating mostly out of fear base or a love base? Next. And here's an interesting question, ethically for adults is, do we fear our enemies more than we love our children? So you can see that love-fear play, right? This deep motivational tension. And childhood quality depends on where we prioritize our resources. And unfortunately, in most budgets of most big nations, they put most of their money in defense, military defense, not health, not children, not schools. Next. Jonathan Haidt is very famous these days, is talking about the anxious generation, that book he wrote, and many others. He's a sociologist. And he just says there's, in his opinion, generalizing, there's these two basic mindsets. You can just see one is more love-based, one is more fear-based. Go next. Another upside down thing that I like is how some researchers and thinkers are flipping the Maslow hierarchy of the upward parallel pyramid, and they are turning it upside down and saying, actually, I think humans actually operate opposite of the Maslow. And so now all of a sudden we got a tension, right? We got a conflict. And so if you're someone who learns in, in EECE school, early childhood education training, Maslow, Maslow, Maslow. And I go, well, have you ever flipped the Maslow chart upside down? Maybe there's actually a whole other way to understand human motivation. Well, that's the upside down. So again, we'll go on the next slide. And basically to be upside down and upside right. And I want to just say that Keely made this puppet of me at the NIA organization last Christmas. She made one for all the staff and did a little play, and this was the one she gave for me. And I've argued that to get around this idea of love and fear is not just opposites, but that if you keep flipping upside down, keep moving, keep turning things, never getting stuck so that you get polarized. That's what I call fearlessness, or part of the fearlessness path. And this is one of my favorite books by an educator, Black African American educator, very unknown, but a very incredible book. And I've used it a lot in my work on fear. And he's saying how to positively enjoy being afraid. He's not the only one to say that, but he has some very radical things way beyond that. Next slide. All right, so here's an upside down story. I asked one of the daycare workers, teachers at NIA, if there's any books on upside down. And this is the one she found for me. Thank you, Vanessa. This is a story, I won't go into the details to keep this very short, is that this little bear was growing flowers and in their garden, and was very proud of them and took very good care of them, and watered, gave music to them, did all kinds of things. But one day they noticed this other kind of plant was growing and didn't know below the ground there was a carrot. But the rabbits underneath, they knew there was something underneath the ground. Again, what you can't see. I find this very interesting, what's conscious above and what's unconscious below. Next slide. And the little bear said, well, all the other flowers are blooming, but not this one. And then the story goes on for 6 or 7 or 8 pages about how the rabbits are all eating the carrot underneath. And the little bear, trying to nourish these flowers, and thought that this should be a flower. This carrot should, they didn't know it was a carrot. They just thought this plant should also have a flower. And at the very end, yeah, just leave it there, Barbara. At the very end, in all the care and all the things that they tried to nourish this green plant, he pulled it up and dug it out one day and pulled it out, and because the carrot, the rabbits have been enjoying the carrot, he turned it up and it looked like a rose. And I think this is such an interesting moment. And then he says, I got it. It was growing upside down, the rose, right? It's like, here's the mindset. I really must have it like all the rest. And so here's this caring bear, right? Loving, caring, so treating these flowers. And all of a sudden you can just say, yeah, but you took what is different and tried to make it the same. Next. All right. These quick slides. I won't talk too much about these. I'll walk through them. And again, anybody can jump in. So this was my first walking down the railway tracks from the house where we moved in, Barbara and I, in 2021. And this is the first time I heard the sound at the daycare. This is NIA in the background, and they have this wonderful little outdoor library and these flower beds that were built. And this is like an open space you can see in a community, right? And this is like urban center city. So this is not like in a nice high end, super groomed. This is along the railway track, no fences. And I was fascinated and found out that this is part of NIA. This was part of Keely's vision for sharing the learning, the knowledge, the place, right? This location. And I just thought that was fantastic. This is their parking lot where they all park. And so I was starting to get ideas really quickly. If I was going to be an artist here in this property, how could I work with that space? Next. And then when I saw the sign that first day, a very interesting sign and interesting name, innovation. Okay, I'm in. If I wouldn't have seen the word innovation, I probably wouldn't have jumped. I jumped in because I saw that word innovation right in the title. So that tells me that's where I want to be as an artist, creative person, someone who thinks outside of norms, right? The normal. And so when looked it up on the website and found out it has influences from Waldorf, Montessori, holistic education, etc. I was really liking the philosophy. And then I started taking pictures and looking at the yard, and I went, I like this yard. Look at the amount of wood, natural wood. Look at the, sure, gravel in one play area, grass in one area, and at the back, a mulch and soil. Right? Three beautiful grounds, all different in one design. This is really intelligent. This is really intelligent for healthy human behaviors and, just a way for us to connect with our roots in the plant world, in the earth world, and stone world. So thank you for the design of all who went into that. Then I started looking around the center when I went and visited Keely to give my presentation of what I could do as an artist in residency, and I'll tell a little story about that. The story, I was looking around and I saw rocks all over the place, and they were painted by the children. And I'm going click, 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 seeing lots of rocks around place. People are painting rocks and putting them in parks. There's something going on with rocks that are really important in the last decade or so. And of course, rocks have always been important, but they're really becoming part of at least this Western and North American culture that I'm part of. So something's going on, and that's clicking with me, right? And I'm going, I'm looking for an art medium. So when I came to Keely, I had the idea of working with stones. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is the house that we rented from friends of ours, and this is my first meditations. This is before I even found NIA. On the bottom on the ground, you'll see that there's rocks. These rocks are put along the base of the house that we were renting. And I was interested to just do a meditation and create this little Zen garden. So I went in and sat down and cleaned out all the seeds and poop and weeds and everything from this section on this gravel, and it had not been cared well for years. So it took me hours and hours and hours and hours sitting in a very uncomfortable position and bending over and playing with these rocks one by one, cleaning them up, cleaning everything out so that it had this really Zen-like, very pure. And then I made these striped lines with, similar colored stones. And you can see I'm creating an outdoor sculpture. This is a sculpture garden. And that really clicked. I can use these stones. I can do something with stones at NIA. They're into stones. Stones are there. What can I do? So at the same time in this residency, I also did paintings, and I did black and white series of paintings. And those ended up, as we'll see in later slides, become important parts. So I'm working at home in the studio doing those paintings. At the same time, I'm going to NIA, and at the same time, I'm working on the stone garden. So it was a combination of me doing inquiry in all of these areas. And that word behind is deconstructionist. Next slide. Yeah, there's the painting close up, the one that you're looking at. Next slide, Barbara, just arrow it. Yeah, good. Those are just parts of the detail of that painting. And you can see I'm a realist painter. I'm very capable. I've been a painter professionally way back in the day. And I was going to do something with the children with these paintings, and I'll tell you about what I did. Next. So deconstruction is part of my philosophical and artistic approach. And I won't go into this in detail, but it means basically reducing things down into combinations that are contradictions or subvert the apparent significance or unity of something. You use things differently than they're being used to and what people are used to, and that disrupts people's familiarity. And that's a really important part of innovation, right? Innovation Academy, creativity. This is what I'm constantly playing with. How can I disrupt and do something deconstructive on the site at NIA with art materials? And the art materials includes people. People are a medium. They are participants in the co-creation of whatever I do pedagogically and curricularly. So let's go to the next slide. First problem I had at the artist residency, once Keeley said, oh, that's great. You're going to bring a truckload of stones in. That's what I said. I'm going to bring a truckload of stones. I've got funding. I'm going to dump them in the back of your, parking lot. It's going to be a huge pile. We're going to invite the kids. We're going to do a ritual of some kind. She's saying, fine, fine, go. And Keeley is such a great director. I mean, I just love the openness she has to different things. Try this, try that, try this. Sure, we'll see. Let's see what happens. So problem I had is if I do an art installation, which it was, ultimately the stone pile was an art installation, on the property outside of the fence. Notice it's going to be in that parking lot adjacent to, very visible to the community, very accessible to the community. And I wanted to connect with the community in the artist residency as well. How do you catch people's attention, curiosity, and engagement? Well, what teacher doesn't worry about that problem? That is a problem as you walk into a classroom. So I had some ideas of how I would do that. So I was noticing in the neighborhood that there were signs, if we go on the left there. During COVID, a lot of people in the city of Nanaimo put up signs. They painted these signs and posted them up on the posts. I think that happened in a lot of cities around the world. People wanted to convey messages when we were in isolation and lockdown. They wanted to bring a positive message. And I thought, that's really fascinating. Signs are important. The stop sign, 5-way. There's only one 5-way stop sign in all Nanaimo. It was right on the block where I lived. And that was interesting. And so then I said, I'm going to make signs for this residency. One of my artist tools is going to be get somebody who can make signs. And luckily, Ryan worked as maintenance person at NIA at that time. Hello, Ryan, if you're ever again around, he made signs for me. So I was an artist able to say, can you make a sign with an arrow up? Can you make one with down? Can you make it to the left, make it to the right? And I started sticking signs. This was one of the first things I did at the residency, putting them up. And you can see, what's the sign? And that's exactly what I wanted people to feel. Up, down, what? Where are these signs going? And that begins the curiosity, right? This is the turning upside down that a sign has ever a meaning, only what people want to give it. I mean, there's some cultural meaning to these signs, but in this situation, next to a daycare, what does that mean? Well, that's great. That's why I was trying to get their attention. Next slide. And then I got the stones dumped. Now, I won't go into the long ceremony of having a dump truck pull up that was all colored in ribbons that I colored it and had some streamers, and it was great. We had a woman driver and she was very cooperative, and the kids were all in a big circle. We had like 50 young ones out or so, and the teachers were with them, and nobody really knew what was happening, but we just knew there was going to be some stones delivered. And I did a ritual, and again, it's quite a long ritual before the stones came. And then all the kids and we said, okay, we're now ready. Let's bring the stones into this important site, this circle that we just created on the gravel of the driveway. And they had little colored buttons they put in, which was their good wishes and things that were bad that they wanted to let go. And so that was all. And then the dump truck comes and we all back up, and then it dumps the gravel and the big dust comes off the pile. It was so magical. I just wish, I've got videos of it, but it was so magical. But one of the things I'm doing with the manuzio effect, this minimizing effect that I was trying to do in the aesthetic, the driver of a lot of the art I was doing that I felt was really important here, is I didn't want to dump the gravel and then the kids immediately think that they can run and jump on top of the pile. And I knew they would. I would if I was a child. It's an important part of life to do that. But I was trying to do something different. This is the artist intervening, trying to find another way for them to relate to stones, because they were an art material. Stones are actually going to be an art material. That's a tough concept for them. And it's a tough concept that I also made the sound sacred, because when I whistled to the dump truck and they were whistling and calling, I said, we're now going to call the stone people. Yeah, that's the moment of a shift in language, right? It's a shift in dimension. This is not just a material. This is now a stone peoples. And they've been on a long journey, I said, and when they come, I'm going to put a red blanket on. You can help me, so that they can rest. They've been on a long journey, these stones. No problem. The children totally got it. We did this great red blanket. It was quite, as you can see, it's just exotic. It's so enlivening. There's a respect and a dignity that was given to the stones. And then I said, oh, we'll need, and one of the children said, well, what if people steal the stones overnight? I remember them saying, and I said, oh, well, I just happened to have brought these flags. And these are surveyor flags. So I had 50 or 60 of those and I handed them out. I said, everybody gets to put a sacred flag that will protect the stone people. So it won't just be stolen or stepped on. And they loved spreading out those all the way around the pile. And those were there for a long time before I started working stones. Now I would never hold kids back from touching the stones. So I said, you can collect. So we had a little egg container Keely brought out with the other teachers. And some of the rocks were white. I added several bags onto the ordinary gravel of white rock because I wanted a little more contrast in the typical gravel that you buy. And you can see on their feet, they don't have those white stones. That's the gravel of a smaller grade. So I added these white into the truck. Well, the kids just dive at the white ones. And I heard the word crystals, and I got, okay, this is just like, now we're in magical world, right? Next slide. That's exactly what I wanted. So there's an image of the one of the first sculptures I did with the stones. After we got the blanket off, and you can see my sign there. You can see the children's guardian flags of protection are still there. Remember, when the children are in the NIA facility and they're up on the play space, they can actually see everything I'm doing. They have a full view, and which I really love that they had the second level on top of that structure, and they could witness me and even interact, and we call and we'd make signs and signals. And there were times when we brought them out, of course. But this was the first, and this was back in the bush where a lot of encampments are. So this is right next to encampments, regular everyday encampments in an area. Again, there's no protection here other than the sign of what we were doing is creating something interesting and beautiful that wasn't there before. And there's the next slide showing it from another angle. These are all things that I did and built in the very first sculpture. So the very first way I was trying to get attention. So to get attention, you have to make paths. People don't notice a gravel pile. And that's the thing, I was out there working and I'm shaping the stones, but nobody's really noticing too much, or they think you're nuts and they just ignore you. And so I created these paths, and then that created a sense of a direction, right? And paths, of course, have all kinds of meaning for people. So we'll go to the next slide. And then I could start using the stones as an art material, right? So I demonstrated these, and these are in that public space, right, outside of the center itself, in that little small library space. And what was fascinating, I would start an art piece and then I'd leave it. And then people in the community overnight on a weekend, they're starting to add. So they would come in and start adding things. They'd start to make their own words and little piles of stones. And of course, at times I encouraged all the teachers to bring their kids out here anytime. See, I had created basically a new play space attached to NIA. Was it used a lot? No, it wasn't by the staff. It was used a lot by the community. Interesting enough. So this is, again, just one interesting surprise, an interesting thing that happened, and I'm totally fine with that. That's cool. If the community wants to interact with these and with me, and they did, you know, many people going down the track, they'd start to know me and wave. Next. So then I decided, well, how am I going to take some of the stones into the classroom per se? And I had many different things I tried. So I'm only showing you a very small sample of the things I did with this project of the residency. And won't be able to go into it because I want to have time for questions and I want to talk about the HR end. So I also did other series of paintings, like black and white, but these shoes are exactly what the children drew and colored on my white runners that I brought. And I gave them markers and I said I was wearing a white artist coat, I was wearing a white hat, and I was wearing white runners. And I said, here are markers, go to it. This is how I introduced myself to the children. And I call that touch. The importance of touch when a stranger walks in, and how do you create a vehicle, a medium for touching them? They can touch you, even though they're touching you right with a crayon or whatever. But of course, you know, they're ready to put it on your face. They're going to put it on your hands. They're going to put it everywhere. They just get a great kick out of it. And it also gives them the power to create me. See, they were actually making the artist. They were making me literally by coloring my uniform, and I wore it every time I went on campus. Every time I went in, I wore that coat and those things. So they got to know me and they called me the artist. They forgot my name. They couldn't care less. My name is Michael. They said, the artist is here, the artist. This is great. So this is what I did at one point. I brought in the paintings when I was finishing them into the classroom, and I explained a little bit how I created these paintings with just black and white and everything in between. And that to me is magical. You can mix a little of black, a little of white, and you can create all the different things that can make that painting. Well, the kids are like totally floored, right? Because kids get 48 colors of crayons and they get 108 colors of crayons, and they have no idea of the spectrum and the spectrum of just tone and darks and grays. Well, I was also doing the black and white because the stones were black and white. The stones graded across gray. And so I was trying to keep a continuity and parallel of the stone colors and then their experience of me as a painter using white and black paint. And so they're going to learn gray in a way that I don't think children usually get an opportunity to learn about gray at this young age. And then I created a space. You can see these bars of gray and black at the bottom of each painting. So I had my painting, I put the blue tape down. I said, now you can draw and color anything you want in those two spaces. And here's the pencil crayons. So I gave them white and black pencil crayons that would show up on gray and black. And there's a little quote there and everything, but I let them just go. And that was fascinating to watch them work in pairs for a few minutes, making their print, and they could respond. Some of them kind of tried to copy a little bit what was in the painting, and others just did their own thing. And so I have all these paintings now in a series, and all their marks are on them. And I did different things with them, which I won't go into. Okay, next slide. And then at one point in the second year, I did an art show for the Art Walk, Nanaimo Art Walk. And I had the children bring art, then the parents brought art of the children, and I created the show. And the children's art is intermixed with my spontaneous creation making and art. And so it was a mixed show, and we did have a few children and parents come to the art opening, but it was also open to the community of Nanaimo. Next. I'm just going to go through a few. I won't talk about these. You can just see me trying different installations. Daisies. This was the opening September of school, or August, I think, when school started in the first year. This was greeting the parents as they drive by and drop off their kids. Next. I did an installation with 400 quarters and actually 1,600 quarters. It's $400 worth of quarters because I had funding. I decided to decorate the path that I made up this mountain of stone, and I decorated it with this mined silver. And I was trying to do an environmental. There's a whole long story about what happened with that installation. It's a fascinating set of events that happened and unfolded. Next. And one of the important things that I realized as I was working on the stones for this intense 6 months is I said, if you want a model of fearlessness, go to a stone. Stones are a good model for humans of fearlessness. That's a longer story and a larger discovery. And I actually thought that in some way that was being transferred to the children, that stones are not scared in and of themselves. Even though these are stones that were blown up by the mountains, because these stones came from the local mountains. And that's something I did tell the children a little bit about and some of the teachers and so on, but it wasn't a major part of the installation. So it had an environmental theme. Next. I've done 5 or 6 videos on talks that I did during this time, and I put them on my YouTube channel, and they're all about talking to children. So those are long, hour long, there's about 6 of them. And they are what I learned from the stones I wanted to pass on to humans, to society, and teachers and caregivers. Next. So that's a resource, right? It's public. And so there's Keely and I. And if I had to leave a message with Keely and the organization after 4 years, there's many messages I would leave. Slow down, you move too fast. Da 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 da. And that's one of the things I learned. This is me at the last installation. Next slide. Next slide. I did work with the pedagogist a few times as well that we had, which was great. And we did some installations using the stones and leaves in that last picture. These are just now to the HR, no back. These are slides, not slides, but a list of some of the things that came from the work I've done with faculty and staff support. We had staff meetings out at Stone Pile. That was great. Like the Stone Pile became a different way to organize ourselves, to actually stand and to be in different presence with the natural materials. And we had our meetings a few times up there. I think it changed the nature of how we talked to each other, how we related. I worked with pedagogistas, I worked with coaching walks that I walk with staff. I say basically, you know, when you're having some difficulties, I would do this with the director and we just go for a walk in the neighborhood and talk things that they wanted to share. And, you know, so I kind of, my counseling therapy, walk therapy. I also did 20-minute therapy sessions that were required, or if we felt required, that for staff members when there was conflict or just somebody struggling as a faculty. So these were all offered, you know, gratis as part of the work at NIA. It's amazing, right? It's just offering, we offer you this. We've got a personal resource on staff. You can see Michael, or, you know, he will meet with you in a break or someplace. So we found that was actually pretty effective in making change very quickly with some problems that we saw in the staff development and, again, conflict resolution. Then I ended up having to be involved in a lot of firing of people, those tough conversations, you know, the really hard conversations when you have to fire someone and let them go. And sometimes Keely and I would laugh that I'm becoming the probation officer every time I come on now as the HR person, because remember, I'm not artist in residence anymore for the last 3 years. And it's just the first year I did that. And oh, somebody's probably going to get fired. And it wasn't true, but it was like, it was an unfortunate part of working in an organization. You get named, you get labeled because of associations, and they're not always true, right? And that was always a challenge for me, is to build trust. How do you build trust with the faculty? When I'm not a early childhood educator per se expert, I'm not working there day to day. I'm only coming in once a week, for a couple of hours and that kind of thing, which is what I did. Um, and then I'm a man amongst the gals, and you can just imagine, the odd time we have some males, but it's a female mothering based organization. And for me, as coming in as a male, an older male, that was a real challenge gender wise, all the biases that go in all directions around that. What I would say, and I think pretty confidently, and again in our Q&A at the end here, we can talk about this, and anyone who's had experiences with me at NIA, but just in general, all of your opinions are important, your views, is that when you have a lot of women in an organization, or a lot of men, in other words, all men, all women, more or less, and you bring in one or two of the other gender, particularly speaking of, not just there's many genders, but the particular male or a female example, that the organization of that group, the psychology of that group shifts. It really does work. I found that my presence alone, not always saying a lot, just made a difference. And what I would say in general, we saw the organization work with more trust and building good relationships with management. That over the 4 years, I'm really proud that I think we built a really great team. And that took time. There were a lot of struggles to get to the kind of team that we have. And never perfect, of course, lots of work. Three major general problems when I came and I talked to the director, and we were looking at, in the HR sort of section of things, that part of this is there's a lot of anxiety and anxiety around change in faculty and staff. And that's not something you want, because that's not going to be an innovative organization when you're constantly resisting change. And of course, I always said, well, they got to feel like they're part of the change, right? Like, we know that, and the director knew that too. But it's not always easy, because sometimes you want that change now as a director, right? You're seeing too many costs when that change doesn't occur, and so we had to work with constantly mediating that. So a lot of conversations and a lot of experimenting. And the effects of insecurities, growing insecurities, especially in young people, and the young millennials and Gen Zs, who are making up the new daycare workers and the new teachers. It's a tough world out there, security-wise. The amount of insecurity financially, having to work, extra jobs, or always concerned you're going to not be able to pay the rent. All these kinds of things really affect staff. So again, when I talked about love and fear, remember early on, you can see anxiety, effects of insecurity, loss of trust. Those all go with the fear-based structuring. And my job was to try and always keep that trust flowing again, and even when it's hard. So next. I won't go into this diagram because I don't have time, unless you really want me to go back to it, but I use this as an assessment tool. I also want to show that creativity scores, a lot of people probably know this, in general, creativity scores in North Americans decrease with age horribly, relative across creativity testing. And then when you look at self-harm rates in the last 10 years plus, 20 years, I guess that diagram on the right, ages 10 to 14, high self-harm rates, going up very rapidly. And a lot of this is due to probably a lot of digital technology and the influence on childhood. So mental health, digital, AI, all these influences are part of something we have to look at in daycare work and in schools, because families are also struggling with these choices. Next. And next, we just put arrow one more. When it comes down to the real base of all my technical, philosophical language, whatever it might be, this is my conclusion. Grit is good for mental health of children. In other words, don't make it too easy for them. Don't give them a device that makes everything easy, and don't fall into using constant easy devices that make things easier. This will really lead to a decline in innovation, adaptations capacities, and creativity, and so on. And it'll breed a culture of fear. Is what it'll do. It'll make people feel very insecure, because you're securing them with easy things, with smooth things, with things that do things for you, like machines. Less is best. And then the last one, curiosity brings beauty, and vice versa. So I think we'll go to the last couple of slides, and then we'll open for Q&A. This was the card that the staff, all faculty, gave me when I left. I'm going to be there one more Monday and next week, and it's a pretty good sign of, I think, what I would want for them is the same, and say to every child, one you, endless possibilities. Thank you very much. Close out, Barbara. Well, hello, everybody. Let's come back to live. Got some comments, got some questions. Let's just all jump in, turn your mic off and just jump in. Barbara will mediate you or moderate you.
So yeah, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, or there's also the chat, or I think it's in the reactions. You can raise your hand, or is it in the chat? I'm not really good at that. Well, watch for your hands, or your hand, or your chat hand, if you have any comments for Michael. I know 4 years is a lot in less than an hour.
Yeah, it's really hard to go and have, I could do a long time. I could do another dissertation on that project. Thanks, Keely. I'm looking at Keely right now, and the director, Keely Freeman. Wow. Yes, Emina.
There's so many things that popped up there. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Mikhail is my Lotus on my wisdom council. So he's been journeying with me for 3 years, and I'm homing down the final days of dissertation writing. Dr. Barbara has been my instructor. So when they threw this into the email, I said, I got other things to do, but I know them and I know what they do, and I know how I'm learning how they think. And I knew that what I would hear tonight would be a blessing, because I'm in my findings chapter of,
Right.
I've already done it once, but I'm redoing it. And so I'm stepping back and outlining and going in and trying to be concise. But I think about, fear. I mean, there's like 10 things I want to go back and talk to them about, but it's interesting. When I was writing my outline for this chapter coming up, I said, I got to have a visual, got to have something I can ride with that's artistic and creative. And the first thing that came to me, actually, the first word that came to me was toxic as an introduction, because I'm dealing with liberatory consciousness. So what better word sums that shit up? But toxic, in terms of the reason for even having to continue to look at that. And then to hear him speak about that in his work was just aligning, not in a negative way, but just that, we're on that same, remain on that same wavelength of discovery and learning and sharing. And of course, I was thinking about, well, I got to have some soil, I got to have some cosmos, and I got to have some regeneration. Those are going to kind of frame how I kind of put my findings together. So, there's so much. I mean, I'm an educator myself. I used to take brown bags with the kids didn't know what was in them every Sunday.
Yeah.
And that's how those were my teaching aids. And that was back when I was, 20 years old. I'm 72 now, but that still was an interesting way to be creative as you were tonight. And so I will send you my notes so that you can go through them and have them for your records. But I appreciate the time that you took stepping into an innovative place and just having fun and letting fun be the learner. And I loved how you didn't play with some difficult things that happen in kids' lives and in adults' lives, but you presented it in ways that like having those sacred flags. Those kids will never forget that they made that place safe. That's tiny but huge. And I know that's who you are. That's who both of you guys are. And so I appreciate this. And I could talk all night, blah, 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 because it was so rich. But I'll be quiet now and go watch a movie with my wife because she's the journey with me too. So self-care matters.
Yeah. Thanks, Amina. Any other responses or thoughts or?
Want to read your poem?
Hi, Michael. This is John Coleman here. How are you?
Oh, John. Hi. Didn't know you're here.
Yes. Thanks for inviting me, and Barbara for inviting me. So the question I have here is: would you ever commit to another such 4 years of such a study and such a commitment there?
Yeah, I think I love working in organizations, John, and John and I are in an organization in alternative education in the United States right now, and that's where I met John. But I think, John, I think any organization that would have me, where I could try some new things, definitely I would jump in. I think you need 2 years to really just get a good ground of working, and then 4 years is like great. I love coming in as an artist first and then doing the more psychological, educational, curricular pedagogy stuff. There's something about coming in as an artist is just, it's such a great way to meet. I'm going to use the language. I get to meet my soul with the soul of the organization, the cultural soul of an organization and a community. That doesn't happen when you come in psychology mode, education mode, or organizational consultant mode. So I would always want the combination of artist first, lead, and then follow with whatever the organization, felt it would want from me.
Great. Thank you for that, Mikhail.
We just have some found poems that are showing up in the chats. This one's from Amina. In the span of grace and place, we breathe, we observe, we respond, or we say no.
Mhm.
Oh. And then Greg also had one too. Meet my soul with the soul of the organization.
Jim, you had your hand up. Thank you, people, for those poems. Jim, you have to turn your mic on.
I don't think we ever lose our childhood, whether it's a destructive childhood or a stable one, whatever kind it is, we carry it forward into adulthood. And I think that with that childhood, there's a deep knowing, a soul, S-O-U-L, that helps us to moderate our life in some way that works as we grow into adulthood and we start to solve problems in our own personal community. Certainly, there's a lot of anxiety that is promoted through fearfulness in some family situations, but I do think that there is a potential for goodness and happiness in every childhood that is carried forward into adulthood, if only it can be reached. An adult needs to examine their childhood to know what it is that is motivating this or that in their communication. I like your idea of compassion as we go through life. I think that even a child that's been through a destructive childhood can be compassionate. They just need to be triggered to an understanding of what it means. And I like to believe that every child has a potential to grow up to be the person he is inside.
Thanks, Jim. And I know you were a lifetime teacher and yourself school teacher, and you also talked about the importance of nature. for keeping that soul connected and alive. Is that correct?
Of the stones, if I could continue just a little bit. I have talked in our group about taking children out on camping trips from the classroom. And I can remember one instant where I had 2 classrooms. There were 60 children, and they toward the end of June, and they needed to each bring a tent for themselves. Well, at the end of the hike down to the beach, there was a meadow where they were to put up their tents. As they put up their tents, all different kinds of colors, you should have seen the moves of the tents around the meadow. A child would put up a tent in a certain place, and oh, I'm not going to put my tent up beside him or her. And tents got moved all over the place. And they were like signatures to life, I thought. It was a wonderful experience to see these colors all over the meadow being moved hour by hour right through the whole first day as they decided, oh, I'm going to be with that person, or I'm not going to be with that person, or whatever. Anyway.
An art installation.
Great fun. And the biggest fun is when they're cooking their first dinner down on the beach, and they don't want anybody coming and seeing how they're making their fire and how they're making out. And so you have a great spread along the beach of children, sometimes 2 together or 3 together, making their dinner. And it was quite exciting.
Thanks, Jim.
Nice.
So, pardon me, trying to connect it with stones. Children love stones. That's all I want to say.
Let's have another poem from Rachel. Always interrupting, not just human-centered, upside down, deep motivations, motivational intention. It was so magical, something interesting and beautiful that wasn't there before.
Thanks, Rachel.
Keely, you have some good comments there. Do you want to share them?
Yeah, I just included my poem in there too. Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Yes.
So I just pulled out words as you were giving your presentation. So global centric. Childhood is also about the environment. Building a better world for all. Leadership is important. Thank you, Gaber Mate. Keep asking the questions. Disrupt the familiarity. How do you catch people's attention? Curiosity brings beauty. Beauty brings curiosity.
Thank you.
Nice.
Any comments you want to make just in general, Keely?
I mean, I really appreciate your presentation. And it just captures a slight glimpse of what a massive impact you've had on this organization. And so there's so many other stories and so many other lessons that we've learned together, or that I've learned individually, or you've learned, or the kids have learned. Like there's so many wonderful experiences that we've had in this past 4 years. And I'm really, really thankful that you walked down that train track. And now they've actually created a walking path down that train track. Before people would walk just on the train tracks there. And I just see that as a wonderful invitation for more people to walk by and be curious about what we're doing. And I'm so glad you were. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, Michael. You talked about the edges, and I'm curious if you could talk about the edges and mental health with children.
Yeah, I went through that slide very quickly. The edges is something I brought as you remember, I'm working on the edge of that house that we were staying, right? The little stone edge. So everything began to realize I'm constantly, and I love edges as an artist. I love them as a philosopher. I love thinking in edges. So that continued to the stone pile being dropped on the edge of the daycare, right at the far end of its edge. And so again, lots of plays on edges and me working in the edge, going into the middle in property on site, campus, coming off it, working back in the edge, and constantly trying to build a communication between the center and the edges.
Mm.
And the edges is also the community. NIA sits in a community that Keely cares a lot about when she bought that property, and she knows the history of that property. And this daycare has a lot of that community sensibility, and people from the community look over the fence, they wave, they say hi. Sometimes they've come on the property and done things, or come to different events at times. But the other edges that I work with, I did actually write a list, and you'll just read them to you. I'm interested in the edges between consciousness and unconscious and preconscious. I'm interested in the edges between things that move in reversals. I'm interested in upside downs. I'm interested in the edges between hurting and healing. I'm interested in the edges between transference and countertransference. These are projections that we put on each other, on reality, on the other. And then that other reflects back to us something. And I'm interested in the edges of when things are, when they are in reversal, when they're in changing, when they're in upside, downside, up movement. And it's in those edges of a transition, like a threshold, sometimes you could call it. So an edge is like a threshold, right? It's like a portal. It's a place where there's a highest possibility of density and concentration, I would argue, for change. And it doesn't have to be a change that we actually know where that change is going, but it just can be a change that could be picked up on and go, oh, that's a change. Notice that. I'll reflect that change back to you as a child. Could be a teacher doing this. And you're noticing the edges of our movements when children walk from the outside and they transition to go inside for lunch or to use the bathroom and wash their hands. I was often talking to the faculty, be aware when you take the children across an edge or a threshold. And then you can notice and have them think about you're now going from the outside world to the inside world. Hey, hi, Bo. And these kinds of changes really are all about noticing what is ready and already moving that wants to change and transform. And that to me is where you find magic. Because magic is basically a change that you don't expect, is one way to define it. That's a simplified way. So yeah, as educators, pedagogues, designers of organizations, etc., that we ought to continually think of the edges. And I've told Keely this, right? One of the concerns of getting really efficient and effective in our management in the organization, and if things are running really good in a certain way, there's a danger in things running too good. There's a danger in what happens, I've noticed in the 4 years is, I said, wow, what happened to the people who were really weird that used to come and work as teachers? They were piercings and they had this and they're doing hula hoop things, and they're coming from a different culture. They're coming from more pop culture and quote, just off the edges of what you expect from, what you see in the normal, quote, normal, and so on. So again, whatever those edges may be in terms of class, in terms of gender, in terms of age, what I notice is efficiency is so seductive in these organizations because it's hard to run a daycare. It's incredibly hard. Financially, it's hard. Emotionally, it's hard. All the demands it takes. And so the tendency to move to efficiency is the danger of losing innovation and difference. More or less. I mean, you can still bring it in, but so that's a little response to the edge. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
I'm just aware that one of your collaborators from NIA has come on the talk. with his mom. And so I was kind of curious to hear you talk about the collaboration that you did, which was part of the residency too. And you might want to speak a little bit too, Bo.
Yeah, well, just to introduce Bo, and then, but Bo and we connected when he was 3 years and 11 months. And when he was 3 years and 11 months, he did a drawing, and I took his drawing and did drawings off his drawing and modified them and then gave them back to him. And then he came and modified mine. And we did this exchange thanks to Keeley mediating this. He even did a video talking about his drawing. And then just in the recent, near 3.5 years later, we just did another exchange of art that he had done. And I took a part of it and reworked it, and then took parts, and he came and reworked that. So he's been a little collaborator for me, Bo. So yeah, if you want to say anything, Bo, go ahead. Your artist self.
Want to say anything about the artwork you do with them?
Anything that you learned from working with me and doing that art, maybe? Or that might be one thing.
Or did you teach? Did you teach him anything?
Did you teach Michael anything?
I think he's pretty talented, but I liked his artwork, so I try to do some of his artwork when he goes and like puts them up. And I copy off of that, and sometimes he exchanges the artwork and he shows it to me, so then I get an idea what I want to do for him.
Yeah, that's really appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we even have some of Michael's artwork on our wall, one that Bodhi picked out too.
That's right.
I remember.
In one of the art shows, yeah.
It just made me think of leapfrog art. When you pass it back and forth, you're doing leapfrog art. Mm-hmm. Cool.
Thanks, Bo. We have a couple of minutes if anybody else wants to say anything or add their poem or whatever.
I have a little poem I added in here. Inner little boy, constant reminder, the man among the gals. Yeah. Oh, someone's. Oh. Greg, did you want to be sharing that? Oh, yes, he is.
There it is. Spontaneous. That was the little child came out there.
Thanks, Craig. Sharing your lines. And Chris, you had a comment there. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. The shifting of paradigms certainly caught my attention quite a bit. The flipping of the Maslow pyramid. I noticed in that flipping of the pyramid, like the base was still upside down. So I don't like, in some sense, the self-actualization part, is that a base or the point?
Yeah.
Was kind of interesting. I was also kind of wondering a few things. There, or something I noticed, there was that story about the carrots and the bear, and I really must have it like all the rest. And then later in the talk, you were talking about the HR and the staff, and the three major problems, anxiety and change, you had put there. And it just really kind of brought me back to the story of the bear and wanting things to be the same. So that was interesting. In the part where you were talking about how to catch attention when you first started the residency, and it occurred to me that that seems to be kind of a problem in the world generally. There's a lot of noise in the world where everybody's trying to demand attention. And there seems to be a distinction and a difference between how you go about trying to catch attention versus the demands of the world and the way the media and the internet, and you're talking about self-harm being maybe connected to computer use and such. So there's sort of a demanding world that is trying to seek our attention, but you are approaching it differently in terms of how do you cut through the noise, so to speak.
Yeah.
Maybe you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting. I guess the first thing is my attracting attention was not commercial. There's nothing commercialized. So that's one. That's huge. When you're trying to attract attention and it's commercialized, then it can be weaponized, and you'll extract people's attention because it's a profit for you. So people are very violent in a subtle way in getting your attention, and we know that. We know all kinds of dramatic ways that can be done. So the subtlety would be, just putting up those signs, right? Up, down, and other signs that I had at different times. That's just moving into the territory, and it's making a presence, right? And a sign is a really interesting thing for a territory marker, right? Like, this is ancient, and in a lot of, histories is that we'll put a marker in, we'll build the stones up, maybe put a sign or something with it at a trailhead, right? Or whatever. These are really important markers, but they're not commercialized. You see, they're just markers. And there's basically those signs that I put up just with the arrows I started with rather than word and text, is because it's basically saying, I am here, right? The moment you pound in a sign of an arrow in a place that's never had a sign in front of the NIA fence, that sign, it's not me. It has no signature of me on it. It's just saying, I am here. And that, to me, is the beginning of how you get attention, because something's unique and different, right, Chris? It's got all of those qualities of surprise, interesting, different, but it's not pushing anything, right? You don't have to follow the arrow if you don't want to. But how many people took the arrow sign when they first saw it and looked up? If I would have had a video recording at the sign, I'm sure people did. And if you didn't actually physically look up, you thought of up. And so then you could ask the question, well, what is the person putting the sign in asking us to look up for, right? Like, wake up. So that's actually what I was doing. That was my artist, is I'm saying, wake up. See, stop moving so fast, slow down. And that comes when you watch, as I worked out on that space, I watched parents dropping their kids off day after day after day at the daycare. They're trying to do it as fast as they can most of the time, not all. And they want to get more efficient with it and more effective so they can rush off to where they have to go. And so the children are caught in the speeding up of efficiency of drop off. And that is your attachment and separation psychology of a parent with a child being left. And so I became very interested to see if I could grab even attention a bit from parents to pay attention to this art installation for a moment, or a sign, and the child pointing out, what's that? And there were a few children got out of the cars and instead of running to the daycare, they're going, who's that? I'm over there and I'm putting something. And it was so wonderful to watch the child sometimes lead the parent over to what was interesting, rather than just the rush to the daycare. So I was trying to play with that tension, right? And it's a conflict because, we want to have quality experiences, but then what happens when people are rushing all the time?
Thank you.
And on that note, Yeah, thanks. I'm just aware of the time. So on that note, no one has to rush off. Michael would be happy to stay if you're able to, but I'm also know that we're at our time of what we yeah, what our plan was for tonight. So thank you all
Was.
for coming,
Thank you.
and for Michael for your talk, and for Keely for hosting Michael all these years, and yeah, for the children.
You might want to just
Mhm.
stop the recording on that, Barbara. Thanks. Yeah, I'll stick around for 10-15 here if people want to. If not, I'll see you again. Glad to see some familiar faces and some new people I don't know.